Welcome to the Centralized News, where we report the major events affecting the crypto economy. I'm your host, Piter, joined as always by Aussie. Let's jump right in. Your time is valuable. Let's jump right into our educational and entertaining content. This is not financial advice. So we had a big old volatile week in Bitcoin. We started the week at 64,000, fell all the way to 56, and we are right back where we started, briefly touching even 65K this morning. What the heck happened? There was a ton of FUD in the market. You want to help me run through this, Ozzy?
Yeah, let's start off with the fact that everyone's expecting the ETH ETF to be rejected, the spot ETFs in the US. So there was some additional FUD around that people were just not excited about. CZ got sentenced to 4 months in jail. So,
Yeah, not bad, but that was right in the middle of the week.
Yeah, that was middle of the week. There was even more growing kind of sentiment that there was going to be a delay in rate cuts with the FOMC meeting. Then
it wasn't the best.
Yeah, that was not the best meeting, although there was not a lot of clarity, and I think that's some of the worst part, but it was higher for longer is the general narrative. Looking at the SEC, who is going to feature pretty highly in this week's news, they sent a Wells notice to Consensus, who are the makers of the MetaMask wallet and of Linea Chain. They're starting to go back on the offensive a little bit.
Yeah, that's for sure. There was also an FBI warning against unregistered crypto transmitters, but this was seen as a FUD. The FUD being like an attack on self-custody. And there was also the Samurai Wallet founders arrested and charged with money laundering. And the kind of FUD angle on this is just it's a direct attack on the privacy that is found on the blockchain and the blockchain technology. So that was a couple of Debbie Downers in the middle of the week.
Yeah, and then the haircut fund. So we talked about this a little bit from the DTCC last week in terms of they're not really offering any collateral on the ETFs, the spot ETFs for Bitcoin. So that removes some lending and some additional value from these ETFs. If we look at the SEC, they've also postponed a decision on a Bitcoin's options ETF. So nothing major, but still a little bit of FUD there.
Yeah, nothing too major. But the SEC also this morning had another Wells notice for Robinhood, so they are not done. And then no week is complete. Actually, the market was early this morning had pumped up to 65, and it killed the mojo that it had. This new Wells notice. But no week of FUD is complete without Elizabeth Warren.
Lizzie Warren was pushing Biden to do something about Iran's Bitcoin mining, and which has been looming over our heads for almost a decade now, saying that they might finally be distributing the Bitcoin. So that distribution may or may not be coming.
I guess like September, I think was the last thing I remember reading about it. Yeah. But that can always get pushed back. I swear, I'll just believe it when I see it. Just hit the market already. Let's see what you got. The other big thing, besides all, there's plenty of FUD, but it's the Bitcoin ETF. And there was this Hong Kong launch. And also the US, there was just some news there that was a little bit negative. So the Hong Kong launch, depending on how you look at it, could be seen as not that exciting. It was like, okay, there was a lot of hype around it, but not that much happened. Not huge numbers, didn't beat US. But we'll try to put it in a little bit of perspective. And then there was also the fact that BlackRock saw their inflow streak end. So they were going for the record. They were getting towards the top 10, or maybe they made the top 10 in terms of number of days with inflows. They had like 72, and then that streak ended. So they had outflows for days in a row. And I think it didn't finally come to a stop until Friday at the end of the week.
It stopped on Friday, and today looks like it's green. But
that's good. But the big news was the Grayscale one. And they had their first day of inflows. This is like towards the end of the week, right? Like, how did we come back at the end of the week? So towards the end of the week, Grayscale had their first day of inflows after 77 days since the launch of these products. So that was, I think, seen where this ETF narrative just plays into the general sentiment.
Yeah, I think we're starting to see a little bit of hope about their mini trust spinoff, which is supposed to help lower fees and be the lowest in the market. So that will be interesting to see Grayscale can maintain that, and if BlackRock will continue bouncing back. And
now,
and I mean, With the TikTok next block, we're seeing some miners getting back in the green again. They need above 60 for the most part with everything that's going on, and so with the halving, so they're
I saw a tweet today that mentioned an 80K number.
the highest ones are somewhere around 80K minimum, and then there some of them that are on the cheap end are around, they need about 66, 66,
Do you think
67.
miners hold on selling, or do you think the miners are more likely to hang on to their Bitcoin?
It, as long as they've got capital sitting around that they can use for other stuff that to pay their energy bills, that's the big thing. They can only wait so long.
But there is some incentive, at least. Yeah, interesting. So that's all the FUD side, right? But there was a lot of good news. And there's something going on besides just Grayscale having inflows for one day. There was a BlackRock insider who kind of, and this is just speculation, but he was talking about sovereign wealth fund interest in Bitcoin, and that we may start seeing that before the end of the year. And there was also a bunch of other kind of institutional adoption. So we had a $44 billion US bank, South State Corp. They're out of Florida. They reported owning Bitcoin. And ironically, this comes from an SEC filing. So they're SEC, whether they want to be or not, are involved in the FUD and in the FOMO. And then we have Latin America's largest e-commerce platform, Mercado Libre. They own Bitcoin.
$29 million worth of Bitcoin.
412.
That's also thanks to an SEC filing, which is nuts.
Yeah, it's like they're attacking it, but at the same time, their reporting requirements are what's also helping the market. Europe's second largest bank, Paribas, exposure to Bitcoin ETFs.
Yeah, and then Jack Dorsey, which is one of the good news stories this past week, his company Block says it will invest 10% of its profit every month into a Bitcoin DCA scheme. So more buyers, just more buyers in the market. And the fact is, miners are saying, we're not making money if we're mining, so they'll probably hold on. So let's circle into some of the bigger, more fulsome news stories. You want to kick us off?
So the last kind of story, positive side story for the week is Coinbase had a great earnings report. So it was earnings report season for a lot of tech companies, but Coinbase just killed it. They had 1.6 billion in revenue, beating expectations. So that was a nice story. Now they had some of their users file a lawsuit. So their stock is still, if you're wondering why their stock is struggling, like users of Coinbase are acting like the SEC suing them for selling registered securities. Interesting lawsuit. We'll see what happens with that. But
yeah,
anyway.
It's happened a couple of times where salty people who lost money sue. It happened to Kraken, and it's happened in a couple other cases.
Blaming them for sell. It's like, you bought it. It's like, oh, you shouldn't have been selling that. Now that I've lost, and the lawyers wouldn't do it if there wasn't money to be made. But it's still, in principle, it bothers me. Yeah. Although this happens all the time, especially in America.
Yeah. Talking about just some of their earnings, there's some pretty interesting numbers. Their net income, or their revenue, was up 1.64 billion, which is up 122% from Q1 of 2023. And their profit margin was 70%, which is up from a net loss in Q1 of 2023. So looking a year out, that is massive. Also, your water bottle is totally in the shot.
Oh, sorry.
So really, we're seeing some like kind of Coinbase go from an unprofitable start of money to making considerable money. Their EPS was $4.85, up from a 34-cent loss a year ago. So Coinbase is going from totally unprofitable to making $1 billion in a quarter. So that's a pretty big turnaround. And I think we'll see them join maybe some of those big tech stocks, including Meta, Google, Tesla, and all of them, NVIDIA.
That'd be exciting to see. I think a lot of it will depend on kind of what happens with all these altcoins and what the U.S. government decides to do with them and how they're going to get regulated. But yeah, they're definitely positioned to do well, depending on how things play out. That's what it looks like to me. But let's circle back a little bit to these Hong Kong ETFs. There's been a lot of speculation. Is it good or bad? The Hong Kong spot exchange traded funds are far underperforming their U.S. counterparts in terms of gross dollars. So they took in 264 million in assets in the first week. Now the ETH ETFs, this is the first of the kind in the world. They also did not really impress. They took in 54 million. It's not all doom and gloom. This was articulated by Bloomberg ETF analysis, Eric Bal. So while they didn't take in as much money, you have to compare the two markets. 310 million is equal to 50 billion in the US market. So in that regards, these ETFs are already as big local as compared to their local markets as the US one. So the Hong Kong equities or securities market is 4.5 trillion compared to 50 trillion for for equities in US exchanges. So just to give you a relative difference. So like in raw numbers, yeah, maybe it's not that exciting. It's not a big splash, but in terms of relative to the size of its market, it was great. And he also noticed that the assets are currently not accessible to mainland China unless you have a Hong Kong residency, which is not a lot of people. So that limits the volume. And also he noted that the fees are higher in these Hong Kong ETFs compared to US competitors. So it's even more interesting the fact they did so well locally. But if you have access to US ETFs, which a lot of these people do, especially institutional investors, why wouldn't they take the lower fee one? We're talking 0.85% to 2% compared to 0.24%. So a significant difference.
Yeah, you're talking triple, if not like 8 times the fees. So that's pretty interesting. But I guess you could potentially attribute that to the fact that you can redeem it directly for Bitcoin rather than cash. So
right, the one big difference, right?
Yeah. Fair. And I'm not surprised that the ETH ETFs didn't do that well, because I don't think that U.S. investors will want to invest in the Hong Kong ETFs, especially considering that they are still sitting there looming on the SEC's table, even though we don't think they'll be approved right away. So they don't want to get into position, wait to see how ETH does, and then have to sell their position to transfer into a Bitcoin, to a US ETF. So I think that's maybe another reason why we didn't see the ETH ETFs perform nearly as well, even though they're the first of its kind in the world. So worth mentioning. And
yeah, I think those ETH ETFs it's a good point you're making, because it's like the dust hasn't settled with regulators. And with these ETFs, you're talking a lot about institutional investing. A lot of people who are on chain playing around with ETH, they can just self-custody the ETH, and they're not necessarily looking to go put it in an ETF. But long term, once it's settled in the United States, you believe in it for your retirement account, that kind of stuff. Maybe we'll see the individual investors get more involved with it too.
Absolutely. That's my strategy. I've put out a video on it before, but the ETFs, as I have to take profits from Bitcoin and ETH during cycle highs, I'll take that into cash and put it into some of my retirement accounts to then go buy ETFs to help tax hedge myself at least a little bit. So worth mentioning. And we've got Kraken as well as other kind of industry leaders saying that the Bitcoin ETFs that are just launched in Hong Kong are speculating that they might be getting access to mainland Chinese investors through the Stock Connect systems, which could unlock a surge of capital from China. We're talking billions, trillions of dollars. Richard Byworth, who's a managing partner at SIS Capital, sparked the speculation and saying that he had just returned from Hong Kong, and there was this talk about Stock Connect, which would be very enormous. The Stock Connect program basically enables Chinese investors to access and trade stocks across borders, albeit there's a daily transactions quota. So there's a cap on how much trading they can do. Briam Paik, who's the COO of Smashfi, also added to the speculation, saying that it's just a matter of time. We've talked about this as well. About 70% of Chinese wealth is in real estate, and There are now over 100 million empty homes in China. And so the Communist Party of China needs an alternative asset to help mitigate social unrest and provide another investing avenue. We talked about this when we were talking about the ETFs for Hong Kong months ago. And so they really need, this could be their kind of alternative asset and giving them a secondary investment for them. So definitely worth watching.
So what you're saying is if they don't allow investment into Bitcoin ETFs, it's good for gold.
Essentially, it's going to be they're either going to have to invest in gold or they're going to invest in Bitcoin. Like, it's not that hard.
Yeah, it's just a matter of getting access to it. All right, should we jump into the macro a little bit?
Yeah, let's break down the macro. It's not massive news this past week and not a lot to see next week, but definitely worth talking about.
Yeah, there's not a ton of reports coming out this week, and we just had the Fed meeting, so I think we'll see the dust settle a little bit as far as the news goes on, the Fed anyway. But unemployment numbers last week weren't that bad. They weren't great, but they didn't go above 4%. That's like the line in the sand, it feels like, where the Fed may have to react.
Even the Fed said that the 4% is arbitrary. Like, it depends how we get to 4%. So the underlying numbers in the 4% will help dictate whether 4% is worrisome or not. But it is a number people are watching.
Yeah, so it's staying 3.8% or whatever it was, 3.7. I think the expectation was 3.7. It came in 3.8. So it did come in slightly hot, but it fuels just this higher for longer narrative. And also just the Fed meeting. And as far as the Fed and US data, yeah, quite weak. But we have both CPI and PPI next week dropping. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. But so for the remainder of the week, that's really all we have to go on. Higher for longer is the theme until morale improves. But when you look at what market participants are expecting, they don't necessarily seem to be buying it. They're still expecting a rate cut in September. I was a little surprised by that based on just all the news and sentiment I'm seeing. And just speculating, but the factors may be just that ballooning U.S. debt and servicing that debt with these high interest rates just may be untenable. And then there's also, last week got swept right under the rug, but we had a banking crisis in 2023. It appears to be continuing into 2024. So cracks just in the overall economy that may force them to pivot. But the U.S. regulator seized Philadelphia-based Republic First Bancorp and sold it to Fulton Bank. And bing, bang, boom, story gone. You know what I mean? Nothing to see here. So maybe that's something that market participants are watching a little scared of.
Yeah, the First Republic had got some FUD back in the during the original run on banks, and so they finally have collapsed. We'll see if we continue to see more. Maybe that's why banks are buying Bitcoin ETFs, help hedge their books. But I think it will be interesting to see if that does keep continuing, because then if you've got banks continuously going down and then employment continuously ticking up, then you might have to react sooner than later. But the speed runs here, and we've got a lot more just altcoin and a little bit of big news that can hit you fast, and some of it's pretty important. So want to start us off?
Oh, yeah, our good buddy MicroStrategy, they now own more Bitcoin than any country or company in the world. So congratulations. I know they have a goal of getting to 1%. We'll see if they're able to do it, but I guess they had another purchase. They're at 214,400 Bitcoin. The closest would be the United States, who is a reluctant participant in this space, but they have managed to seize 200 is all through seizures. They've managed to seize 207,000 Bitcoin. So nice job, US.
Yeah. Tether has invested $200 million to acquire a stake in BlackRock's neurotech company, which is a biotech company. So Tether expanding outside of the crypto space and cozying up a little bit with BlackRock there. Jito is reportedly building some more restaking for Sol, and it's now officially the largest Solana dApp by TVL. So their liquid staking is really taking off. Talking about liquid restaking, EIGEN Layer and their token EIGEN is set to launch on May 10th. but it will not be transferable at launch. So keep that in
There's some
mind.
controversy around that, wasn't there?
A little bit. People were a
Was
little
it
bit.
untransferable? Is it just like a lockup period? It will be transferable eventually, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it's just a lockup period.
Yeah,
So
okay.
people are just fighting that a
They
little
couldn't
bit.
sell it right away, so people were upset, I guess.
Yeah.
It's understandable. Especially if they weren't expecting it. But yeah. Anyway, maybe more, a little bit blown out of proportion, felt like.
Yeah. Zero Lend, which is a lending and borrowing platform on ZK Sync and several other chains, is dropping their token today. From what I've seen, it's pretty minuscule rewards, a couple $100, maybe if you're lucky. So that's not great, but LAYERZERO took their snapshot for round 1 of airdrops. It sounds like they will be doing multiple rounds, so watch out for that. With this story being in Bitcoin, talk to me about it, because I don't know enough.
I'm your resident maxi here, even though I do like to play in DeFi. But this is a perfect story for that. I don't know much about it either, but it's definitely something I'll be keeping a side eye on. And it has to do with that BTC-Fi narrative, but build on Bitcoin. Bob, a BTC EVM Layer 2, launched mainnet on April 30th with 40 projects launched. 300 million in TVL fueling this potential Bitcoin DeFi summer. We'll see if anything comes of it. I don't know if you remember, Ruins was a big story a couple weeks ago and just has disappeared completely. So we'll see what happens with this whole Bitcoin DeFi. If anyone can actually make it happen and make it usable.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens there. That being said, Uniswap has partnered with Robinhood to help enable direct purchases of crypto using funds from Robinhood accounts, debit cards, or bank transfers. So that is a pretty interesting partnership, considering they're both being pursued by the SEC with Wells notices. So worth watching. And we had just a little bit of fun. Peter Brandt is called a Bitcoin top and said that Bitcoin could decline to mid 30K. So do your own research. Definitely not financial advice there.
But it's good to know there's multiple sides of the argument. I'm totally biased anyway, but go ahead.
Oh no, we're both totally biased, but this is really for educational and entertainment purposes only. Please leave a like, a subscribe, a comment. Tell us what story you're most interested about, what caught your eye, or what are you watching out for next week? Maybe something we should include in the speed run. Let us know. We'll see you guys next time, and thanks for watching.
Thanks, y'all. See you next week.